Hey, you know that boat that sunk last month? That boat that has a military history? Would you put your hand in your pocket to donate to try to fix it up and make it a wartime display in a museum? The bloke you're about to meet is hoping you'd say yes to that question. He reckons it should be preserved and he wants your help.
Hi, I'm Ambrose Palmer, and I'm the eldest son of the skipper of what was HMAS HDML 1321, now known as Rush Cutter, and at the moment sunk at the bottom of Darwin Harbour somewhere.
This is the boat that sunk last month?
That's correct, yes.
You've been researching the history of this boat. Obviously there's the connection with your father. Tell me its story.
Well, she was the very first of the Australian-built HDMLs. She was specially built for the coast watches and commando operations along New Guinea. She spent most of her time in the war behind enemy lines, either dropping off coast watcher parties, servicing them with supplies and that, picking them up and moving them, or with dropping off commandos and troops from the Angao units.
That's dangerous to be behind enemy lines all the time.
Yeah, especially in those days where the maps were poor, there's no echo sounders, no radar. They were going into unknown harbours at night with just a lead line and feeling their way in, dropping the people off, then feeling their way out, sometimes hiding in the mangroves while they waited for the people to return. Other times they would leave them there for a day or a month and have to come back in later and pick them up. Probably the most famous one is the dropping of the 8 commandos on Mushu Island. 7 of them died on the island. 2 were killed, and 5 were captured, tortured and murdered by the Japanese. 2 of the bodies were actually only recovered 2 years ago. They only found them 2 years ago and they were buried at the Bamana War Cemetery.
Did the boat actually have to come back to pick those guys up to realise what had happened, or did they get word of that kind of thing?
No, they had a rendezvous for the next night. The boys were dropped ashore. They went ashore in foal boats, and Dad was supposed to pick them up at a certain rendezvous. They didn't meet the rendezvous. So Dad waited all night, withdrew that day, came back the next night. There's still no sign of them, so he withdrew again when daylight came. Went back the third night, and this time he went right in close to shore. The boys actually heard, the one survivor actually heard his exhaust. They heard the ship's exhaust, but they had no way of signalling them. And they couldn't signal in any way. So he withdrew again, and he came back a fourth night. And according to a report I had from the first officer, who only died this year, was that they went right in under the guns to try and find these blokes, and they couldn't find them. So they had to withdraw. They then ran out of fuel, and they were ordered back to base to refuel. They refueled, came back with some soldiers, and they carried on a search along with a lot of other ships for them. What transpired was that the blokes had got ashore okay, they had carried out their mission, and on their way back they had found that the Japanese had discovered their foal boats. They'd picked up a paddle, they'd lost a paddle. One of the boats had sunk. They'd picked up the paddle, the Japanese picked up the paddle, found the foal boats and had set up an ambush for them. And that's the reason why they didn't get back. Their radios were wet, their torches didn't work, and they had no way of contacting the ship.
How dangerous for your father to be going back to the same place where the Japanese would have anticipated that somehow there would be a boat coming back for them?
They would have done that for sure, but he didn't. They kept on going back. At one stage, they passed, or a barge full of Japanese soldiers passed by them within a couple of 100 metres. And they just stayed there dead quiet and just hoped that they wouldn't be seen. Because they didn't want to compromise the blokes ashore, so they didn't open fire on the barge. And the barge just went straight past them.
I just can't imagine being in those shoes.
It would have been pretty hairy, I think. I'm glad I wasn't there.
What qualities did she need to have in order to do this kind of a job?
She was very shallow draft, was very manoeuvrable, and with 1321 in particular, she had a special cabin, which the boys called a dairy for some reason, fitted behind the wheelhouse, which was for the commandos or the coast watcher boys to live in. But the basic was she was very quiet, she was manoeuvrable, and fairly shallow draft, and with a good crew on board that knew what they were doing. My father was a very experienced seaman in island waters. He'd been there since about 1919 in the Solomon Islands with small ships. So he had a lot of experience sailing in island waters, And that was probably one of the big features that they wanted for a skipper to do those sort of things on that ship.
That's Ambrose Palmer, who is the son of a captain of that ship, HMS 1321. And of course, if you would like to help, he is hoping to get together a bit of help to get this boat back to wartime condition. At the moment, it's still underwater, so that could be a little bit difficult. We'll hear a little bit more from him next hour about exactly what happened yesterday when the boat was attempted to be refloated and what he hopes for it, what he thinks could be the potential of this boat currently sunk at the moment. If you'd like to listen out for that, it'll be on your radio in about 45 minutes or so keep an ear, or less, half an hour or so, keep an ear out for that. If you're not going to be around then and you'd like to donate or find out more, you can search for Save 1321 and you'll see more there. Kate O'Toole with you on 105.7 ABC Darwin at 11 to 5. We were talking a little bit earlier about the amazing history of a boat currently sitting underwater in Darwin Harbour at the moment, the MV Rush Cutter. Ambrose Palmer was sharing some of the vessel's history.
Well, she was the very first of the Australian-built HDMLs. She was specially built for the coast watches and commando operations along New Guinea. She spent most of her time in the war behind enemy lines, either dropping off coast watcher parties, servicing them with supplies and that, picking them up and moving them, or with dropping off commandos and troops from the Angao units.
That's dangerous to be behind enemy lines all the time.
Yeah, especially in those days where the maps were poor, there's no echo sounders, no radar. They were going into unknown harbours at night with just a lead line and feeling their way in, dropping the people off, then feeling their way out, sometimes hiding in the mangroves while they waited for the people to return. Other times they would leave them there for a day or a month and have to come back in later and pick them up. Probably the most famous one is the dropping of the 8 commandos on Mushu Island. 7 of them died on the island. 2 were killed, and 5 were captured, tortured and murdered by the Japanese. 2 of the bodies were actually only recovered 2 years ago. They only found them 2 years ago and they were buried at the Bamana War Cemetery.
That's Ambrose Palmer, and it was his father who was the captain of what's now known as the Rush Cutter at that time during the war. Of course, the MV Rush Cutter is still at the bottom of Darwin Harbour just at the minute.
It's most unfortunate. I'm part of the Save 1321 group, and we'd actually started procedures to try and raise money to buy her before she sank.
I didn't realise that. I thought it was in response to the sinking.
That added panic to it then, and then we have since doubled our efforts and tried to raise the money. We are being fairly successful, apparently, in respect to money being raised for historical items. We have raised quite a bit of money, but it's coming in very slowly.
How much money have you raised?
Last time I checked was $2,600, but we need a lot more than that. And where anybody in the Darwin area or anybody who can help us in any way, we would certainly appreciate it. Even if it's just somewhere to store her safely until we can get that money raised. It'll probably take several months. The harbour managers have promised us they'd look after the boat for the next couple of months, assuming they get it lifted at that moment. I hoped she'd be lifted yesterday and she wasn't. So if they can get lifted and they can float her, they'll look after her for a couple of months. So we've got a couple of months leeway, but we want to get somewhere that we can put her as soon as possible. And if anybody can help us with that, we'd certainly appreciate it.
If you'd like to get in touch with the studio now, if you have an offer for Ambrose, you can call 1300 057 222. When did you first start looking into trying to save this boat, and what did it mean to save it before it was sunk?
Well, it means a lot of it to me personally because of my father's connection to it. But she's, as I mentioned earlier, she was the very first of the Australian HDMLs, and she's the last one. She's probably the last one left in the world. She's important because of her association with the Coast Watchers, who were very famous, of course. Even MacArthur recognised that. And the Mushu, we would like to get her and use her as an exhibit and a memorial to those 7 men who died on Mushu and Karuru.
How much would you need to change her in order for her to be suitable for that purpose?
I think we probably need close to, if not $500,000.
Wow. And you have 2,000?
Yeah, so we've got a long way to go. We're just hoping for some generous corporate donations.
Wow. Because what do you want to do to the actual boat itself?
We'd like to bring her in, completely restore her to her World War II configuration. And my preference, but this will be up to the committee, of course, my preference would be to put her as a dry land exhibit in a shelter and allow people to walk inside her so they can see the conditions that these blokes lived in. Very cramped. There was 10, 12 men on that ship in very cramped conditions, no air conditioning, just a bit of ventilation, and they're going so slow most of the time in the harbours they didn't have that ventilation. And it'd be a very good way, I think, for the modern people to see how hard those blokes lived and what they did for us.
Have you had any fruitful discussions or potentially fruitful discussions with corporate entities?
No, we haven't at all at the moment. I'm here until tomorrow night, and if anybody wants to contact, please do, because I think she's worth saving. I think it's a contact with the past, and those men died for us, and I think they should be recognised, and the ship's a good way to do it.
Thank you so much for speaking to us today.
Thank you.
Ambrose Palmer, and what a task ahead of him at the moment. He's been able to raise just over $2,000, but hoping to put together a project that may cost as much as $500,000 to fully restore the boat that's now known as the MV Rushcutter, currently sunk. If you want to help him, you can give the studio a call too, 1300 057 222.